I was so stoked to get invited to the press launch for the brand new Triumph Tiger 1200 in Portugal. This is a huge bike release for Triumph and a much needed update for the 1200. Triumph have pulled out all the stops to bring this bike up to date and really target BMW's majority share of the ADV sector. Shedding a massive amount of weight while cramming in additional tech and revising the entire bike, including the frame and the engine, has resulted in an absolutely fantastic machine that I would consider a totally viable alternative to a BMW GS. I got to spend a day on the road riding the GT Pro, GT Explorer and Rally Explorer models, followed by a day off-road at the WIM Motors Academy riding the Rally Pro. Here are a few of my thoughts. The Triumph Tiger GT family is pegged to be the most popular in the range with an estimated 60% of sales. This is currently supported by pre-order statistics. Just like the previous generation, this bike is super comfortable. It has a great seat height, which is actually a bit lower than most other adventure bikes I've ridden. I felt really planted, but I didn't feel at all cramped. The seat height is also adjustable by 20mm, which I think is a brilliant design feature. The aesthetic design of this bike is really cool. Obviously it shares a lot of characteristics with the 900 Tiger. I absolutely love it, and I have to say the fit and finish of this motorcycle is absolutely superb. A few of the optional extras were on display to us at the press briefing. There are luggage options, obviously, there's side-loading plastic panniers for the GT range, but I would definitely go for the top-loading aluminium versions designed for the rally range. There were a couple of negatives I took away from my day on this bike, mainly the vibrations. The bars and the pegs were a little bit buzzy. My hands were tingling by lunchtime and buzzing by dinner. The vibrations also make the mirrors completely unusable. Secondly, I wasn't a big fan of the stock foot pegs. They're a bit small and the rubber insert in them wiggles around a bit and doesn't feel too stable. Thirdly, although the screen is well designed and easy to adjust, I still get that annoying head wobble, that head buffeting that I experience on most adventure bikes just because the screen is that little bit too short. Because of this, I rode with the screen in the lowest position all day just to get constant wind pressure on my head. The electronic suspension was absolutely wicked on road, and I really like that you can adjust it electronically on the fly to suit your riding style. Another cool feature is that you no longer have to adjust the suspension for your weight, as the computers on board the bike calculate this automatically. This is such a plus on a touring bike because you can ride solo, with a pillion or with luggage and have the perfect ride every time. Combine this with the cast 19-inch front wheel and the bike is super confident going into corners. Overall, it just handles brilliantly. The engine has way more character than previous models thanks to the new T-plane crank, which has been brought over from the Tiger 900, but it still retains that smooth linear power of a triple, which is so different from nearly all of the competition. This bike is deceptively quick. It does feel fast and accelerate quickly, but you're so protected, the ride is so consistent and the suspension is so smooth that you often don't realise just how fast you're going. High-performance touring and ADV bikes are getting to the point now where you're never really left wanting more power, and in Triumph's case you're not going to be left wanting better handling either. The only other niggle that I found is that the great handling is interrupted by a scraping of the hero stoppers on the foot pegs in almost every tight turn. The lean angle is so low, and it's such an unfortunate limitation on an otherwise brilliantly handling machine. On the GT Explorer model you do get a few extra features, obviously that 30-litre fuel tank, but also radar blind spot detection, a full crash bar system and passenger heated seats. The GT Explorer didn't feel noticeably heavier than the GT Pro. Maybe if you've just filled up the fuel tank and are taking it off the side stand, but I didn't really notice it even when doing tight manoeuvres at low speeds. The blind spot assist works brilliantly and I really enjoyed testing the algorithm throughout the day to see when it would and wouldn't light up. In addition to illuminating when your blind spot is occupied or about to be, it also flashes if you're indicating at the same time to further highlight the danger. I hate to come back to vibrations again, but I think it does make the blind spot detection even more useful because at a lot of the rev range you can't really see out of those mirrors. The upgraded mirrors on the Explorer models are so much better looking than those on the GT, GT Pro and Rally Pro models. which use the same mirrors as on the 900 Tigers, 800 Tigers, and practically every Triumph Triple since 2007. As I mentioned before in my review of the Tiger 900 Rally Pro, I think this is such a lazy design move, especially when you're redesigning pretty much every other aspect of this bike. For me, riding the GT Explorer on such technical twisty roads really demonstrated how capable and impressive this machine is. After a long, hard day of fast riding, I got off the bike and yes, my hands were a little bit buzzy, but it was otherwise super comfortable. I've spent a fair bit of time on the 1250 GS, and from my perspective, BMW have made a more comfort-oriented tourer, which can feel a little bit more lively, but doesn't necessarily have better performance. Triumph has tried to strike a balance and add some more character to the smooth and linear triple, and it's definitely worked, but it's a very different engine and a very different feel. The vibrations that come from this compromise didn't make me want to spend endless motorway miles on this bike. But if you're wondering what I would choose between the GT Pro and the GT Explorer, it would 100% be the GT Explorer. To me, there's no downside to having the bigger tank as the weight wasn't really noticeable. It's also nice to have that extra range, and I think the other additions to the Explorer models such as the radar blind spot assist and the heated pillion seat are really nice additions. I also got to ride the Rally Explorer on the road, and to be honest, it does almost everything the GT Pro and GT Explorer will do. The only thing I really noticed is it feels a little bit less confident going hard into those corners because of the 21-inch spoked front wheel and the less road bias tyres. Other than that, the handling is still brilliant, and you actually have a better lean angle and scrape the pegs way less due to the 20mm of extra suspension travel. I preferred the riding position on the Rally Explorer. It's a lot more upright and it just feels more like an adventure bike. With the seat set in the highest position, it is noticeably taller, but luckily you have that 20mm of seat adjustment, and I'm sure Triumph are going to bring out some low seats as well, which will be available as optional extras. Vibration and comfort wise, it was pretty much all the same as far as I could tell. You only really lose that final 10% of cornering performance that you get from the GT. The semi-active suspension does a really good job of keeping this bike balanced and controlling that extra 20mm of suspension travel. Although you can feel it dive a little bit going into corners, it's nowhere near as dramatic as on the 900 Rally Pro. The brakes across the whole range are absolutely fantastic. You can use the front brake super aggressively and be totally confident in doing so. The GT did feel slightly more responsive and had better front end feel due to the tyres, wheels and the suspension setup. I found that the ABS and traction control were slightly intrusive when riding on the road. It seems that the Rally Pro is the only model with the ability to completely switch off the traction control and ABS, although you can jump into the rider modes and customize them to dial back those rider aids if you have the time to delve a bit deeper. On the second day of the press launch, we got to go to the WIM Motors Academy and test the Rally Pro off-road. I was really looking forward to this part as I've ridden the 900 Rally Pro off-road extensively, and having been really impressed by that, I wasn't too sure what to expect from the 1200. To be honest, I was pretty apprehensive about the extra weight and being put in the advanced riding group. I thought that this bike was going to be a bit of a handful, you know, hard to turn, hard to brake, just an all-day wrestling match. But I have to say that all my preconceptions were totally disproved, and I would take the 1200 Rally Pro over the 900 Rally Pro when riding off-road any day of the week. To be honest, I think that most of the journalists were absolutely dreading the day off-road, but it was wicked to see them come away so enthused, and everyone I spoke to remarked at how easy this bike was to ride and what an awesome day they had riding it off-road at WIM. Just as on the road, the extra weight isn't really noticeable. I started the day with a full tank of fuel, and I was shocked when I realised because it felt so planted and easy to control. As soon as we pulled out of the parking area, I felt comfortable on the bike, and that feeling of confidence just grew and grew throughout the day. Triumph have changed the manufacturer-approved tyres, including the recommended off-road option, which is now the Michelin Anarchy Wild. In my opinion, this has made a massive difference to handling, braking and power delivery compared to the 900, which I used with Karoo 3s. The semi-active suspension is absolutely amazing. It's something I felt was really lacking from the 900, and I'm so glad that they've not only included it on the 1200, but done such a fantastic job of it. The spec sheet for the suspension is super impressive, with thousands of changes a second, all based on complex, ever-changing algorithms. Triumph claims that the suspension can sense when you're jumping and make adjustments mid-air in preparation for your landing, which sounds totally wild, but having ridden the bike was pretty plausible. It felt amazing, and it actually works a lot better once you've switched the suspension settings to hard. Speaking of switching the suspension settings to hard, this totally transformed the bike for me. It made the handling feel so much more direct and allowed for much better power delivery and more responsive front-end braking. Weight transfer is such an important part of controlling a bike off-road, and becomes even more important when you're riding something a little bit bigger and a little bit heavier. Stiffening up the suspension to the hard setting really improved the balance of the bike and made sure the weight was not sloshing around when you're braking, accelerating and cornering. The bike still bottoms out on larger potholes, although it's nowhere near as bad as a BMW GS. Where it differs though is that when this happens, it's not trying to buck you off with excessive rebound. The ride isn't quite as cloud-like as a BMW GS, but that is no bad thing. It's still super smooth, you're just getting way better handling and a lot more feedback. The brakes continued to be just as impressive off-road, maybe even more so now that the traction control and ABS were switched off. In one of the press photos, I noticed that I managed to pull the world's tiniest stoppie without even realizing. It kind of just demonstrates how much control and how much power these brakes have. The power delivery of the 1200 is so smooth, and that's incredible to use off-road because it allows for such precise throttle control. I sometimes find that digital throttles are a bit snatchy and sometimes trying to be a bit too clever for their own good. But in this case, Triumph have knocked it out of the park. It's super direct, super responsive, and as I said, super smooth. There's bags of power as well, and it just feels like there's always more on tap. When faced with loose and slippery hill climbs, the engine was able to tractor up it without any need to lay down additional power and brake traction at the rear. I was really impressed by this, and I'm sure it'll be super useful for day-to-day off-road riding. For such a big and powerful bike, it was super manageable and felt a lot more forgiving than the 900. The new frame ties all of the components together beautifully and results in fantastic handling both on and off-road. There's a lot of thoughtful adaptations like bolt-on passenger foot pegs, which can be easily removed now when you hit the dirt, and a new shortcut which allows you to easily reselect the last rider mode you were using if you turn the bike off and back on again. This is a lot more useful than it sounds. On the 900 it was quite frustrating that when you stopped for a chat on the trails, if you turn the bike off and turn it back on again, it would automatically be in the road setting and you had to sift through all the selection menu to put it back in Off-Road Pro. Now you press 2 buttons and you're already there. The bars were really nicely positioned and the width allowed for great control of the bike. The models we rode also had the wider off-road pegs installed, which is something I would definitely put on the bike if I owned it. They allowed for much better control and they were also way more comfortable than the ones that come stock with the bike. Although the screen was a little bit too short for me when riding on the road, it was absolutely perfect for off-road riding and was completely unintrusive. I thought the adjustable seat height was a really cool feature for shorter riders riding on the road. However, when riding off-road, it became invaluable to me. It gave me so much extra confidence knowing that I can drop the seat and still touch the ground, especially when manoeuvring slowly. With the Rally Pro having an extra 20mm of travel, it is noticeably taller and more upright. The addition of the 21-inch front wheel has totally transformed this bike and given it real off-road credibility. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, it is a little bit more wishy-washy on the road, but if you're planning on taking your bike off-road, the Rally Pro more than makes up for this slight drop in performance. The Triumph Tiger 1200 Rally Pro has exceeded all my expectations off-road. I would definitely take it over a BMW GS. In fact, it's more aligned with offerings from KTM. The bike excelled on those fast fire roads, but also felt manageable and controlled on tight technical trails and hill climbs. The only point at which I noticed the weight was when I made an incorrect steering input at speed and then had to try and counteract it. With all that mass, the consequential momentum is pretty substantial and it's hard work to force it back in the right direction. Riding this bike off-road really gave me a sense of the potential that this bike has and how easy it is to ride even for beginners. But I would moderate your expectations. It's still a big bike and the kind of roads that we were riding aren't too common in the UK. If you don't have much off-road experience, this is not the do-it-all bike to learn on, especially if you're based in the UK and riding green lanes, which are normally wet, narrow, rutted and rocky. You'll also face the unavoidable compromise of finding a tyre that works off-road without sacrificing all road-going ability, or vice versa. If, however, you're looking to ride some well-graded fire roads in a national park, or travel across the Pyrenees on unsurfaced roads, this bike will definitely take it in its stride, even if you have very limited riding experience. Both the 1200 GT Pro and Rally Pro models, as well as their Explorer counterparts, are seriously impressive bikes. Triumph have pulled absolutely no punches when it comes to targeting BMW, but thankfully they've produced a bike to back up all of that torque. The features are abundant, the tech works, and the ride is fantastic on and off-road. Yes, the bar buzz on the GT would annoy me if I had bought it as a Grand Tourer, and yes, the angle at which the pegs start to grind is both unsettling and a little bit annoying, but it is kind of a testament to how far 1200cc adventure bikes have come in that we're riding them hard enough to notice these things. Put it this way, you wouldn't be bored on a spirited day riding through the twisties. As for the Rally Pro, I'm a little bit smitten. I would take it over the 900 Rally Pro, which I really wasn't expecting. If I was choosing between the GT Pro and the Rally Pro, I would choose the Rally. You don't have the peg scraping issue due to the extra ground clearance, which I really like. I also much prefer the riding position, and I would happily sacrifice that small drop in front end confidence when going hard into corners for the impressive off-road capability. That pretty much sums up my first ride experience. I hope you found this video useful. If you have, please remember to like and subscribe as it helps me out a lot. And if you have any existing questions, just drop a comment below and I'll do my best to get back to you.